Welcome, everyone.
And then had Professor.
Great to have you all here. My name is Drew Bent. We have a really wonderful panel today with leaders of some of the biggest tutoring companies, as well as someone who funds some of the biggest tutoring companies. I want to start by getting a sense of who's in the audience. So could you raise your hand if you are working on a company or startup that does tutoring? Okay, quite a few of you. How about a company that doesn't do tutoring but hopes to do tutoring? Okay, you're already doing tutoring. How about on the investing side or the philanthropy side? Anyone here? Awesome. How about people who work in schools, districts, state? Great. So we got a distribution, a lot on the company side, working on tutoring. Want to get started, Karen, you and I were talking. Karen works at the Gates Foundation, and she works with a lot of organizations. She sees a lot of organizations working on tutoring, and you were telling me a little about some of your hopes and also maybe concerns for this conference. And, you know, of course, tutoring is the big craze here, but we have to make sure it's done at quality. So I would love to hear more about those thoughts, Karen.
So I was sharing with my fellow panelists that I was a little bit hesitant coming and talking about tutoring because everyone's talking about tutoring, and we have seen the US try to scale tutoring before, and it was during No Child Left Behind. And we had everybody pop up and say, oh, I can do tutoring, I can do tutoring. And a lot of money was wasted, and there wasn't a lot of accountability. And we didn't have a sense of quality, like what makes good tutoring. And so I'm happy to say we actually do know that now, this time around. And so several of us in philanthropy have invested in the National Student Support Accelerator, who has done some analysis of what are the quality factors needed in tutoring. So I want to just be very clear that most of the evidence of what works in tutoring right now is high dosage tutoring. The other thing that is coming up is a lot of on-demand online tutoring. That's younger. It has not had the time to build the evidence base behind it. Does not mean it's not good. It just means that that is something as a field we need to build out to see what level of impact that model can get.
So to the rest of our panelists here, how do you think about quality?
So I guess, Justin Serrano from Littera Education. I think we're recent. I mean, so we launched in September of 2020, and we benefited from the fact that I think people did have a sense of what worked. And so I think we kind of went the opposite direction. We started with the research on what works and thinking about, well, why isn't it done more? And it turns out it's pretty hard to do. And so Littera is really a platform that's designed to help enable districts primarily and other organizations to scale the kind of tutoring that we already know works. So starting with the design principles, how can you actually make that achievable and give districts the tools and the flexibility in terms of what tutors do they want to use, what tutors they have available, what's the lowest cost option that's still going to be effective. That's kind of where we live. And so we actually have a grant from the Gates Foundation really to expand that work to figure out both to sort of measure relative efficacy of programs, one-on-one, one-on-three, but also then to help districts understand what did it cost me to do that? So should I be serving 100 students or should I be serving 300 students? And I think as the waters recede a bit from the current federal funding bubble, those are really good things to learn, now, because when things get back to normal, that's going to be an important consideration, I think, for districts to be able to sustain that kind of effort.
Happy to weigh in on that as well. So Philip Cutler, Chief Executive Officer from Paper. I was a teacher as well, so I spent my my early years in the classroom. And we saw, one of the things that was really evident when I was teaching, and I'm sure everyone here can kind of relate to a certain degree, was that most of the support that existed out there was reserved for wealthier families. And so what needed to happen, at least in my eyes, was a solution that could support all students and really elevate the bar for everybody. And that's difficult to do, and I think a lot of the solutions that have been studied in the past and the research that's been done hasn't been done at scale the way that it needed to be. And so in my eyes, when I was teaching, the big thing was, well, I can support a few students, and maybe 10 to 20% of my students could hire private tutors, but what do we do about everybody else? There needed to be something that was very scalable, and that required us to integrate technology into it as much as we possibly could, and then you think about how does that technology make the service that you provide better, more effective. The way we operate at Paper is we integrate into the school district's technology stack. So we actually partner with the district directly, and we work with them to identify their needs. But the big thing there is we need to be able to support that whole district. And so scalability is really, really important. And you need to be able to do that in a way where you can measure the efficacy. You can be looking at those things, and it takes time, and I agree. It is still new. Our company is 8 years old, so I've been at it for a while. But even at that, a lot of that time, enormous amount of that time, was spent trying to understand how do you integrate into a school district? How do you manage the service side in a way that's scalable? So these are things we're thinking about an enormous amount, and I think as time goes on, we're going to have a lot more data to support all of this.
And the question, sir, for all of you as you talk about this question, in the nitty-gritty details, like what are the metrics that when school districts ask, like, is this successful? A year in, what are the metrics you all look at, and you work with the district leaders? Starting with you.
Well, yeah. So we support about 2 million students today. So we have a lot of different districts, and we have districts that span from some of the poorest communities, the wealthiest communities. We've got some of the most rural districts, the most urban districts, and their needs vary. And how they assess success can differ considerably based on who their students really are. We've got districts that have really high English language learner student populations. Those districts are going to have a very different lens than some of the already high-performing districts that want to elevate everybody. So I think it's important to look at the community and what their needs are. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that's really important and we look at very closely is student confidence. And that can manifest itself in so many different ways, but we think the long tail to that is more resilient students who are participating and more engaged in their learning, and then ultimately better citizens.
Hi, I'm Ryan Patenaude. I'm the Senior Vice President and the co-founder of FEV Tutor. And Bill, those are great points. Several of those resonated with me. So I come from a family of public educators as well. And one thing, and to Karen's point, that sort of kept me up at night was vendors and partners specifically in the K through 12 ecosystem using their own pre and their post-test data to suggest that the program was effective in using a siloed program, not integrated into the tech stack, not integrated into the ecosystem. So our approach is one, similarly what you heard from Phil, integrating into that ecosystem, understanding deeply who those districts are and what their needs are. So learning loss and unfinished learning is just a magnified term for achievement gaps that have existed for how long now. And so when we partner with districts specifically to address that great question, we're looking at multiple measured outcome goals, including growth on benchmark data to start to close those gaps. You have to create small wins over the course of time to be able to do that. Maybe it's state testing proficiency as another one, but certainly grades, confidence, and multiple measured outcome goals that are important to our partners. Have been the foundation pillar for our deep commitment to research and efficacy, and I think that's the key component here when you're looking at those outcome goals that matter to students and matter to those districts.
James, take us to the UK.
Yeah, I can speak from a UK perspective. So I'm James Grant, co-founder of MyTutor. And in the UK, I think the system has quite a high degree of accountability for teachers and schools. There's Ofsted who are regulating and awarding kind of gradings to schools. There's rankings and league tables. There's high stakes exams from 16 to 18. And so the starting point is a mentality of we have to improve the progress of every student. And so from there, I agree with Phil that there's stuff that goes beyond just academic achievement. Confidence is very, very important. Raising aspirations to get students thinking about the next phase of their kind of learning journey is quite critical to us. And just for context, we have a near-peer tutoring model. So our tutors are university students or recent graduates. And so our tutors are not necessarily the only brand of tutors we think work, but from a kind of relationship perspective, there's something quite magical about offering something different to what happens in the class with teachers kind of laying the foundations of curriculum, and then near-peer tutors really reinforcing the gaps and building confidence, building a great kind of trust and relationship. So yeah, that's kind of the UK's perspective.
So one of the things we did is when we were looking for what can we invest in that is having outsized impact on students, we contracted with a company called Mathematica to help us first come up with what are valid and reliable measures if we're focused on math, on how a student knows math, how they use math, how they enjoy math, and that enjoyment gets to kind of the sense of belonging, the attitudes, the confidence, that self-efficacy. And that is a resource that we actually have made available on Mathematica's website for the whole field to benefit from. So we've done the hard work on additional valid, reliable measures from a math perspective besides grades, which also are a really good indicator too.
One of the phenomena that we've seen in schools is you can offer tutoring, free tutoring to the students, and they won't always use it. So this uptake problem, I think I'm sure all of your organizations have faced this in different ways. Would love to hear how you think about that, how you work on it.
Again, speaking from a UK perspective, I think the thing that's commonly misunderstood about tutoring, particularly in schools, is the kind of operational lift that goes on around the scenes. So it's one thing getting a great quality tutor and having a great lesson space for them to deliver tutoring in, but I think the type of tutoring that we do, which is kind of scheduled tutoring, same tutor each week, it's a heavy lift. And so in the beginning, when we started 8 years ago, I used to say to teachers, don't worry, we'll do all the work for you. It's really easy. And I no longer say that because the reality is that it's not easy. It takes work to deliver a program that kind of delivers impact. And so we spent 8 years building all the tools around kind of evaluating the success of the program, making sure that people show up, making sure that people know why they're showing up as well. So it's not just about, I know that my lesson's at 3:30 on a Wednesday. It's also about actually selling why tutoring is something that's helpful for them, not a punishment. So all these different kind of tools that we've built have kind of led to greater engagement and much higher attendance rates than we've seen with other providers in the UK.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the intentionality of programming is where, it's also evident in the research, it's most likely to work if it's during the school day. And I don't think that's because there's something magical about a school building. It's just that they're there and you can make them go do it as opposed to when they leave and you have a lot less kind of control over that. I think, so it is hard work, and I think it does have to be intentional and feel as much as possible, at least as part of what's happening in school. And so part of that also is the curriculum that's, sort of populating those tutoring sessions. The more coherence it has to what they're seeing in class, the better that's going to be, the more effective it's going to be. And students maybe seeing material before they get into class could be really helpful. But, some of the stuff that I think we talk about as research is also very intuitive, right? So, participation matters. Well, that makes sense, right? I mean, if you don't do it, it's not really going to help very much. So what are the factors that go into participation? Why does high-dosage tutoring work? Well, because it happens often. Having a tutor in a tutoring session is a good thing, and having that same tutor over time. So, again, we kind of approach it as the research is pretty clear. The research is intuitive. Like, we would all understand kind of why that would work, but I think it is that operational lift of why doesn't it happen more often? It's because it's actually hard to do well, and I think that's where taking the work out of it, I don't think there's been a lot of innovation there that I think you can make it easier for schools to kind of get where they need to get to. And ultimately, from our mission perspective, it actually is about helping the students who need it most. So you could argue it's not available for everyone, but I would say that from an equity lens, trying to get kids who need the resources that they need is actually where public schools live in general, and I think that's what we're trying to focus on.
So, Drew, you sort of made the comment at the beginning. You said one of the issues is that the uptake by the students is not particularly high. There's a specific reason for that.
Yeah. And by the way, I say this because for reference, I also work on a tutoring organization, so I know this firsthand. We provide free tutoring, and it's one of those things where like, oh, everyone's going to come for it, but that's not always the case.
So there's a couple of reasons why that's always been the situation. One of them has been it's typically been reserved for certain students, right? If a school district, in our case, rolls this out to everybody, there's a universal message that's said to the whole community that every student has 24/7 unlimited access to support. And that's very different than saying you need to come ask for a specific amount, an hour of tutoring, or to participate in a particular program. The marketing aspect within the district is very, very different. Imagine if you said your company has health insurance for employees, but not everybody gets it. Only some people get it, and only if you really deserve it, and you have to prove that you deserve it, or you have to get selected to have that. Your messaging as a company is going to be very, very different than if you have it covering everyone. Now, today, most companies provide that type of health insurance for all. The way we think about it, and the reason why I think our uptake within districts is so high, is because the marketing message to the families is that everybody's supported. They have this whenever they need it. And so from semester to semester, you might go from having a situation where you're great and you're doing really well in all your classes. The next semester, now you're struggling. You've got your calculus class, or you've got your trigonometry class that you're really having a difficult time with, and you need a tutor in that moment. So a lot of it comes down to historically, it just hasn't been available to all students. And so there's been this mindset that, it's not such a, the uptake is not so high. It could be. It just requires everyone to have that access to be available to them.
I just have to say, I feel like the benefit of, even though it's more work, but the benefit of having it scheduled is that you're not competing against like video games or sports or, something like that. Because one of the things that I wonder about is like, if it's free and you have unlimited access, like there's still other things competing for a student's attention. So do you ever like get to schedule?
So that's a good question. We've actually tested scheduled sessions. Okay. And there are certain groups, particularly younger students, that benefit more from that. I think the interesting thing for us, because it's going through the school district specifically, the teachers are often the ones who are actually assigning this as part of their own curriculum. So they're saying, hey, put your first draft of your essay through paper. And that's a requirement in the assignment. Or they're going to say, hey, if you get stuck on this, go and work with your paper tutor. So it's coming from the teacher, and there's a narrative there. That's not to say that scheduling isn't. There are students who scheduling is like a requirement for, and I think the younger students in particular, that's the case. I do think there's a certain agency, though, that students need to demonstrate to say, hey, I do need help. They put their hand up. And historically, when you're in a classroom setting, putting your hand up and asking for help can be stigmatized. But when you're at home, or about 50% of our usage is during the school day, you're behind your screen. It's a lot more comfortable, so you're not necessarily feeling that same stigma. I personally don't have any apprehension to having students schedule this stuff. We've tested it and haven't seen the results with the older students. The younger ones more so, though.
And sometimes we talk about this dichotomy of scheduled tutoring sessions and on demand. Ryan, I know we were talking about earlier that you bundle them together sometimes. So I'd love to hear when you bundle them together, what do you find each one is better for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the opportunity here is multiple entry points for something that we inherently know is positive and is going to drive that achievement. And I think that's where we need to be able. That's how you scale, right? And so it's not one thing, or the other. It's going to be a combination. So if you look at the three legs of the stool, and like Annenberg research, right, a high-quality tutor, a consistent tutor, and a personalized learning experience for students. So we've seen a blend of both, where we do have those at-bats during the school day, where there's second doses of math and ELA and intervention blocks and scheduled after-school programs. And now, where we are today, it's the access and the equity is important, right? Because now we can extend and expand that learning time and create multiple entry points, right? So I think it's just as important to think about the equity of the opportunity for the students and the entry points for those students who wouldn't have otherwise had that opportunity, but certainly a combination of having those two things, the research and the evidence that we've been collecting over the last 10 years, and what's shown growth for us is really based on that targeted model, to your point. And we've also seen big time opportunities where we can have outcomes driven in the other models. I think they're complementary, and I think all of that has to work together to actually bring this to scale.
I agree that there's different models of tutoring for different students, and so I think it's helpful to have all various forms at their disposal, at a school's disposal. For me, we've found with MyTutor we operate a 1-to-1 and 3-to-1 model. And we introduced 3-to-1 partially because of the scalability kind of point, but also because there's a more social aspect. So 1-to-1 can be quite intimidating. It can be quite full-on and intense, meeting someone for the first time, particularly for kind of low-income students who aren't necessarily used to meeting people from different kind of states or walks of life. And we found that that as you get sort of more hands-off from schools, what's important is that the learner is more independent. So there needs to be that baseline level of engagement and independence in order to press that button or kind of proactively reach out to a tutor. But I do agree with Phil's point that there's a stigma problem in tutoring, and where it's seen as something, as I said before, that's more of a punishment, then students will disengage very quickly. And so the framing, the marketing kind of point is something we think about quite a lot.
And James, you have a near-peer model, is that right?
We have a near-peer model, and one of the things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic was the UK became the first government in the world to create a dedicated national tutoring budget, which we helped pilot for the Department for Education. And since then, tutoring has become exceptionally mainstream in schools. So every school has a tutoring strategy. There's not a question of should we use tutoring. It's how do we use tutoring. So I am a believer that it's important to have in-person, online. It's important to have different supply models, different forms of tutoring. I think teachers should have that choice, and then I think it should be underpinned by evidence as well. So I think that it's really important. We're a for-profit company, but we embrace kind of evaluation and impact, randomized control trials. I think we see ourselves as having a sort of responsibility to contribute to that evidence base.
I can add one more thing on this, specifically related to scheduling and how that's always historically kind of been viewed as part of the tutoring model. A lot of that has to do with the way that these businesses have operated in the past, right? You schedule your 1 hour of tutoring, and whether someone's coming to your home or whether it's online or whether it's in a center, it doesn't really matter. The probability that a student needs 60 minutes of tutoring at that exact moment is very unlikely, right? They might need 52 minutes, they might need 80 minutes, they might need any variation of that. And so the ability to sort of adapt to what their needs are actually makes the model a lot more efficient and affordable for schools, for whoever is purchasing it, because you're meeting them where they are at. And I think that that's something that's really interesting, that technology kind of affords, that you don't necessarily have to do 1 hour complete, unless you have your own curriculum, in which case you're working through something that's very tailored. But I do think when it comes to academic support, and we see this quite often, enormous amount of the use on our platform, and for those who aren't familiar, it's primarily instant messaging based, chat based. An enormous amount of the usage is very short 5-7 minute sessions that are used for what we call validation. And the idea here is that if students are working through something and they get stuck, they don't necessarily need hours and hours of support. They need somebody who's going to give them the confidence to be able to sort of move on, and they know they're on the right track. That doesn't necessarily require any sort of fixed schedule to do that. You don't know when you're going to hit that roadblock. You don't know when you're going to have that question. Everybody here has probably, cooked something at home and you're like, I'm not really sure. Am I supposed to take it out of the oven right now or leave it in? Or wouldn't it be nice if you had somebody you could press a button and they say, yeah, actually, it's been in for 40 minutes. Time to take it out and check, the crust or whatever. So there's a component to that I think technology really is the only way to make it affordable and scalable in that manner.
I guess I just feel like we're talking about two different things. And so there's one thing about getting a question answered, and there's different ways to do that, and flexibility is the key. So when I have the question, it's great to be able to ask that question and get it answered. I think that's a very different problem you're working than talking about you've got kids who haven't had school in 2 years and can't read, or kids who haven't had school in 2 years and are so far away from passing Algebra 1 that the likelihood that they're going to drop out is pretty high because they can't handle high school coursework. And it's not about a schedule, it's about a systemic sort of intentional strategy about helping students actually learn a lot. And to expect those students to self-diagnose and ask for help when they happen, it hits them, is just not very realistic to sort of achieve the goal around that issue. And so I think we're having one conversation around tutoring, but I think we're talking about serving different needs, and I don't want that to be lost and conflated.
I know.
I was going to say the same thing, so thank you. I do think a lot about, I focus specifically on math, and I think about NAEP, and I think about the fact that you see like proficiency from 4th grade to 8th grade to 9th grade just do this downward trajectory, and you're seeing things like proficiency at 40% and just going down. There is so much content that, and that was before the pandemic. There's just so much content as a country that kids need help with because whatever it is we're doing in the school system is not getting everything that they need to learn. And so there's, people learn differently. And so I think there is a use case for both of the deep content as well as the, in this moment, the help I need.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot more we could do on that. I do want to ask one more question, then we're going to open up to the audience to start thinking about your questions. One thing I'm curious about as you all, talk to districts, and I imagine in some cases the same districts, and they have to make decisions, and whether it's on quality or cost or the type of tutoring or the hybrid, I mean, there's all these different things. What are your experiences as you talk to districts? What are they looking at? How are you all differentiating yourselves? What's that been like?
I think outcomes matter. So for us, we've been deeply rooted in how to create efficacy and outcomes. And the way we get there, yes, it can be engaging, it can be data-driven. I think what we're talking about here is a dosage of tutoring can equate to an outcome, right, somewhere, right? So that might mean a schedule, that might mean something different, but it needs to be personalized for that student, it needs to be a dosage, and ultimately, I think if we're working together towards a common goal as an extension of a teacher, right, we're a multiplication of that instructional time of the teacher, and we are deeply focused on growth and proficiency and other multiple measured outcome goals that are important to that district. That's the way that that's why we started this as an impact company and why I thought we could do it differently than my sister's turnaround school. They're on a 10-year transformation plan in my mother's school district. Like, what can we do to actually make a difference that matters? And that's why we started the company. But I think it's really about what are those outcome goals and then how can we get there together regardless of what that feature set is.
Again, speaking to our market, where we work with 1 in 3 secondary schools, state secondary schools, I guess by now the kind of brand of what we do is something that teachers kind of understand and know about. So, teachers talk, they go to events like this, and they ask what the other person's doing. Before that, I guess the main sort of ingredients were near-peer model felt sort of almost non-confrontational to the teacher model. So there was something very safe feeling about our model of tutoring. We always delivered online, so that was very helpful by the time the pandemic hit, where lots of our competitors were scrambling to build an online offering. We've never delivered an in-person lesson, so we kind of built that expertise. The operations and platform that surrounds the kind of program that helps teachers actually deal with the heavy lift. And then the tutor quality processes, so everything from our 1 in 7 entry requirements to interviewing, to initial training, quality assurance, and ongoing personalized feedback for tutors. It's those processes that we've really scaled, and we've got a tutor base now of 20,000. So we've had to productize a lot of that offering, and then we've used our most experienced tutors to deliver those quality assurance processes. So those sorts of things really stand out in our market.
Yeah, I think a lot of, Ryan, what you said is definitely true. I think what the school districts are looking for vary district to district. It's going to depend on what your community's needs are. I don't think it's one size fits all when it comes to what their needs are. They're dealing with different things. They're dealing with different challenges. A lot of it has to do with the way that the curriculum is being taught, the types of teachers that you have. Rural districts are very different than urban districts. So I do think that there is differences in terms of where you're at geographically, but even from a socioeconomic perspective, how they're evaluating these types of solutions. And I think that you have to have I mean, there's district administrators in the room right now, right? I'm sure everyone here would probably give you a different answer in terms of what they're looking for. So having those conversations and just getting a pulse for what their needs are is critical. And then tailoring your solution and making sure that it works for them is important.
I guess the only thing I'd add is I think it's evolving. I think, if you look at what initially, even if through RFPs or sort of look at what's out there, there was a lot of, tell us what you have. It was like, we have a big problem, what's out there? And I think it's starting to settle a little bit. I think after another school year of experience and some outcomes, I think it'll be more clear from a district's perspective, kind of what's available, and as more experience on the different platforms. I think it's just so early, and they had to make decisions so quickly. I think there was a lot of kind of hope that they're making the right decision, but it has to be made now. And I think that is changing, and that's maturing a bit.
Okay, let's open it up. If you have a question, we don't have a microphone, so just stand up. Soren back there, I see raising his hand, and just yell so everyone can hear you.
Hey, my name is Soren. I study peer tutoring and I build interventions for peer tutoring at Stanford. And with peer tutoring, one of the big challenges is teaching quality so that people know the types of rules, issues, and help others. And all of you, in some way or another, train people to be effective tutors. And I'm curious, what are the most useful insights you've gleaned about how to effectively train someone to do the job of tutoring well?
Great question. So the question for those who didn't hear was, how do you effectively train people to be tutors?
That's a great question. So at Paper, we actually hire and employ every one of our educators. So it's not a marketplace. It's not like somebody just signs up. So a big part of that requirement is us to be able to train these individuals. And obviously, most of them come, as I'm sure they do with all our companies, with the subject area expertise and so on. Great. What's unique in our particular case is that we now require them to be able to teach through instant messaging. And that is something that most people don't really have experience. Look, I studied to be a teacher, right? I spent 4 years in teachers college. They didn't tell me one thing about how you teach online through instant messaging. So a big part of it for us in particular is making sure that we take these individuals who obviously are really strong subject area experts. A lot of them are teachers themselves or have been teachers or want to be teachers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be great at doing it online. And so there's a lot that goes into that. You don't necessarily the language that you use, as we all send text messages, I see people on their phones right now, right, sometimes can be misinterpreted, right? And especially when you're dealing with high school students or elementary or middle school students, they may not necessarily understand exactly the message that you're trying to get across. So the use of emojis and the language and the sentiment, all of those things are really critical. So we think about that quite a bit in terms of how we staff and train our educators. And then obviously, one other piece that's really, really important and unique is there's also a peer-to-peer component within the tutor network, right? That they can learn from one another. And there's sort of best practices or practices that are shared amongst them based on different subject areas. And I think building a community where they're all working together, I think there's opportunity between all the companies up here to sort of share best practices on that front, because at the end of the day, we're all here to support the students. And there are key things that are learned across the different platforms that can probably be used by all of us. So I definitely encourage that conversation.
We invested in Saga Education, which is known for its effectiveness in high-dosage tutoring, and they really wanted to move beyond just providing direct tutoring, but having more widespread impact. And so we invested in their thing called Saga Coach, which is like free to anybody who wants it, that helps onboard how to be a tutor. It's a unique job. And they talked to me a lot about how we can't emphasize enough how important it is to continue to coach tutors so that they refine their skill set. So it's a free resource. You can see if that would be helpful.
Just to add one thought, something we learned really early on is that the relationship and the trust when dealing with low-income students, disadvantaged students, is absolutely key. So we invested quite heavily in teaching our tutors how to build that trust. And in our upfront compulsory training, that's kind of the first thing we focus on. As Phil said, teaching chat-based or teaching online is a skill set in itself, so there's some stuff in there. And just one final thing, because we focus on the high school market, for us there was a debate really early on about how prescriptive we wanted to be around the lesson itself. And there's a balancing act, because it's important that we provide those guardrails where we support our tutors and we have some baseline level of quality and consistency. But also, you don't want to lose the magic where the personal touch, where tutors can kind of bring their personality into the conversation. If you lose that, then it becomes a robot program, and we really wanted to avoid that.
I know we're down to the last 5 minutes. I want to make sure we have time for at least one more question up here in the front. Just make sure to yell, because people in the back may not hear.
Oh, thanks. I'm at a very awkward. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Phil.
So, firstly, I just want to say that I think that all the schools and tuition companies are doing a really great job. So I don't want this question to come across as critical in any way. It's actually just genuine insight that I'm trying to derive. When you think about the actual problem that the companies are trying to solve, I'd like to know what you guys think about that. Like, in terms of what are you solving for? I know at a very superficial level what we're solving for, when we're tutoring kids. But like Karen, you had mentioned before that the kids aren't getting what they need from school. And so what I'm trying to question here is, okay, so we might be solving the problem on a superficial level by adding the tutoring and everything, but what is the raw underlying problem? Because tutoring, even pre-COVID, has been a big thing and a big trend. And why is it becoming more and more increasingly something that kids need to be doing to actually understand the work at a deeper level to what they're doing?
I just want to say, I think that we're having this reckoning of seeing all the things that weren't working before the pandemic, but now that the pandemic has happened, we're like, oh, wow, we really aren't getting the kids what they need in our school systems. And so I think that's a little bit driving towards tutoring can be part of the solution. It's not the silver bullet. But, I often think about, when I tried to learn new skills, whether it was working with a personal trainer or having I'm taking harp, there's something about getting that one-on-one attention that I think tutoring can really solve for.
Yeah, and at the U.S. education system, at least here, right, a spotlight on something that's been, I won't say the word pandemic, but I just did, epidemic, right? Student achievement gaps, especially for those who do not have those opportunities from an equity standpoint. And what did the pandemic do? Well, I think it showed a spotlight and it provided resources for an opportunity. Something like tutoring has a very high effect size. If you look at the research on tutoring and you look at Annenberg, that's a button that you can hit to be an X factor. If it's integrated, if it's personalized, and there's a high quality tutor, right? So if you're not solving for equity, you're solving for achievement gaps. And if you're not solving for that, you're solving for multiplying teacher time, right? There's teacher burnout. Teachers are leaving the classroom. What are we doing to collectively, make sure that we're focusing on this key area? And again, it may not be students who are 4 or 5 grade levels behind, but that's a thing now, and it always has been. But what about kids who could get a little bump to get them to where they need to go that could change the course of their life? And I think ultimately, tutoring and the research behind it has always been there. And with this opportunity to leverage innovative, the concept of this panel, innovation and technology, to bring that forward on scale is just a huge opportunity. And the problems are ongoing. It's long-term, and they're important.
Thanks, Ryan. So in these final couple minutes, first of all, I just want to thank you all. I know we got right into the heat of it. I really appreciate this conversation. As we now reflect on the conversation had, I know not all of you had met before, so this is the first time some of these organizations are coming together. Could we just go around and everyone share a sentence or two, a hope they have for how they can work with someone else on the stage going forward? Karen, start with you.
First of all, I hope we met our goal of being a little spicy. We were told not to all agree with one another.
This was a goal we all said we wanted to.
Yeah. I am really interested in further looking at the evidence base and building that evidence base, because we know what works with high dosage tutoring. This is a newer model for kind of more online, on demand, and so I would be interested in exploring those opportunities.
For me, this is obviously not a one company takes all market. There's different needs that need to be met, and so I just enjoy learning from all the different models, taking the pros and cons, trying to fix the disadvantages. So for me, it's just great to be on this sort of panel to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. One comment that I heard across the board here is the strategic partnership with the districts, and I think that's different from the spiciness you brought in at the very beginning. I'm looking forward in the windshield and moving ahead, not looking in the review, but that being said, that's an important point. So I think the innovation here on the stage and the ability to be able to offer different types of tutoring, to bring that to scale together as a community, push innovation, make everyone better, and do that for the greater good of students is any reason why I'd love to work with anybody on this stage.
Yeah, I'll say something that I think has been quite clear and should resonate with the audience through all of this. Everybody up here is putting children first, right? Everybody here wants every child to be able to reach their potential. And if we're all looking at it through that lens, it doesn't matter the model that we're taking, we're going to end up having to collaborate. We're going to share best practices. We're going to do what we need to do because it's ultimately about the students. They're the ones who need this. And so it's not to say our model is better than this model, that model is better than the other. It's that collectively we're all pushing in the same direction, and that's a net win for education.
So I'll be really quick. The easy cheating answer is that we're already working together, but I won't go there. But I get asked regularly about can you work with other tutoring companies who have tutors but maybe don't have the operational sort of capabilities, and I think that's where on the human capital side we very much want to work with anyone who is interested in staffing tutors for schools, and we want to make it easier for schools to actually digest that and make it effective.
Please give this panel a huge round of applause.